Hello, 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 and welcome to another episode of NextGen Industrialists, Revitalizing American Dynamism, the podcast where we dive deep into the forces shaping the future of industry, from advanced manufacturing to industrial automation and resilient supply chains. I am your host, Belinda Ephraim, founder and CEO of Catalyst Point, a boutique advisory firm representing founder led businesses that drive advancements in manufacturing, supply chain, and industrial automation, providing M&A service and strategic acquisitions on scaling to 8 and 9 figure exits. Today, I am sitting down with Jenn McCabe. She is a partner at Armanino LLP, an accounting firm, to explore the fascinating parallels between the high stakes world of skydiving and the equally thrilling realm of mergers and acquisitions. Drawing from her extensive experience as a national skydiving champion, seasoned financial expert, and a post exit founder, Jenn offers unique insights into risk management, decision making under pressure, and the importance of meticulous preparation in both skydiving and business transactions. Jenn, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
I'm really excited to actually have you here. Before we begin, I want to thank you so much for spending quality time with me. This is a real privilege for me to invite people I admire and respect into conversation. When I do these things, I always liken my interviews to the indigenous traditions of storytelling in communal experience. I am going to start, but before I do, I want you to know that you are in absolute control. You can choose to not answer a question or answer the questions any way that you want to. So,
If I
Jenn,
get to say pass, when you say something, I go pass. All right.
that works. I want
Okay.
you to feel comfortable, and I want you to be able to answer the questions any way that you feel inspired to. So,
Okay.
Jenn, what is your story?
Okay, this will be easy. I don't have boundaries, so you'll have to stop me.
Okay, good.
Um, so, you and I started talking about skydiving, which is funny to me. What I love most about that sport is that people walk around drop zones and they're wearing T-shirts that say almost 100% of the time, "No fear." That's what they say, "No fear," and that is definitely the way that I have always been. I was an awful child by all accounts. I was in trouble. My mother was frustrated with me. Um, I started it as everybody does. You go to college, you get out, and you want to get the best possible job you can. And I thought about going into public accounting and took a real dogleg turn into advertising, into doing accounting at ad agencies, because it was more fun, because the people were more fun, because Los Angeles was more fun than Chicago, where I got the accounting job offer. The weather was better. So that first job is super important. I always tell college graduates, if you're a hard worker, you're very likely to be successful at that very first job. And so it's really hard to get off the track if you're doing well, right?
Yeah.
So I started in advertising and just plunged forward from there and just kept driving. Eventually, back then we called it working for the man, got old because I was a super hard worker. And by then I was on a skydiving team and I had to travel every week to, practice. If you have a skydiving team, 7 jumps in a day is a lot, and that's maybe 7 minutes of practice in the air. The rest of it is on the ground. So that took a lot of time. I was also going to school at the time. I was doing post-grad education. So I just had to keep going. Those years were a blur. And then I built my own company for decades, and that was fun, being a leader, developing talent, really helping clients go from inception to exit. So I had a lot of clients that were going from start all the way to finish with me over that 25-year period. And then at the end of that, I sold my own company and merged into Armanino. I got very lucky, I think, because it's hard to find the right suitor and the right culture and the right money, and all those things really magically came together for me. So, the way that I am as a person is hard work pays off. I really believe in hard work. I know it's not a very popular way to be these days, but I've always gotten ahead just by trying harder. By putting in the time. It doesn't mean I'm the most brilliant athlete on the team, but I for sure am hardworking, right? And at work, it's kind of the same. There are people around me here at Armanino that are subject matter experts that just put us all to shame. They're so smart, you can't even believe it. And I always have enough to know who to call. So I like to talk about not being afraid. I like to talk about networking. I do believe that so much of my life has come down to making connections, reaching out to people who, thank goodness, remember me and go, oh, you know what? She'd be pretty good to talk to about whatever crazy thing comes up. So I would say the other thing that I like to think about in my life is no regrets. Many years ago, I realized when I'm an old woman, I do not want to look back and go, darn it, I shoulda, woulda, coulda, whatever, insert. So I tell people all the time, I say yes to too much, and people are always like, oh, you need to scale back. Well, no, you don't. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in compromise. I am a very black or white person. So I say yes to anything and everything. And if that's, hey, let's go see U2 in Dublin tomorrow. Let's get on a plane right now. I am like, I don't even need to go home and pack. I'm going. I've done that,
Yes.
So I don't believe in saying no, because you might miss something super important. And I don't want to be old and go, gosh, if only I had done that thing, A couple of years ago, I thought, I wonder if I would have started my career in San Francisco, if I'd still be there, because I love that city. And one of my cousins said, well, you go there every year for work in the fall. Why don't you just go and stay longer this year? And so I did. I lived in San Francisco for 2 months. Just told my husband, that's what we're going to do. Let's take the dog and go.
Wow, that's pretty incredible. I remember my early investment banking days, we actually did that. And we would just decide, some of us ladies on the transaction team would be like, okay, let's go to London. And it was like, just go for the weekend.
Yes.
And there was no planning. It was like, book the flight and just go. And it was a lot of fun, just being
super fun. That ability to be impulsive is very freeing. It can be, it's a thing about me, it's one of your greatest strengths is also one of your greatest weaknesses.
Yeah.
So I can be a little too impulsive sometimes and hurt myself in the process, but I don't ever regret it. The choice to act and to move quickly is super important. And I think that as a business leader, the thing that most annoys me in people when I work with them is indecisiveness. I absolutely think that's a killer, because as a leader, people look at you to make decisions, right?
Yes.
And when I work with clients who are indecisive, they spend way too much money with us, trying this, trying that. And they think that they have to be like, that's a way that they appear to be smart. Oh, they're looking at all the options. And I think that at a certain point, it's fear and it's inaction and it's not being careful. Being careful is good. And I wish I was more so, but being careful to the point of inaction is really detrimental to you as a leader and to being able to move forward at a time when things move so quickly. The other thing is, Belinda, I used to say when I owned my own company and people would come to me, employees, afraid, right? That the no fear thing, I would say, stop it. Fear is getting in your way. Just try it. If you mess it up, it's okay. We'll fix it together. You will learn in the process. We always say making mistakes is critical to learning. And then a lot of times in our businesses, we set people up where they're afraid to make a mistake. And that's a terrible, terrible thing. Have you had a boss that wouldn't let you make a mistake?
Oh
I did.
yeah, I've had those. I've had
I
those,
had one
and
once.
yeah, and I learned, and I think the upside to that is that I learned how to manage up
Yeah.
very well, because I think I was in that role for about 5 years, and it was painful having a micromanager,
Oh,
and there really was no room to grow in
yes.
terms of my ability.
You're not
So
empowered. You know, that's one of the values here at Armanino. They talk about letting people be empowered, and it's real. It's not just words here. And if you don't take that power and do something with it, people are like, what's wrong with you? Right?
yeah.
When I had a micromanaging boss, I remember I was in a meeting, and it was a big bank cash management meeting for a big client, a big shoe client. And we had done this work in advance, and all of a sudden I looked at it and I realized there might be something we should have done differently, right? And so in front of a room full of people, I said, you know what, we could look at that again. I don't know for sure if that's right based on what I'm hearing right now.
Mm.
And she gave me the most horrible death stare. Everybody in the room knew it, and everyone got quiet. It wasn't just me, the whole room of people stopped collaborating.
Hmm.
When we left, she told me to never, I don't remember how she put it, but basically never ever suggest that there was a mistake with her work or about us ever again in front of people, ever. And it didn't matter how respectfully I had done it. Nobody else thought it was a problem. Everybody was afraid of her.
Yeah.
And she was so, you know, she beat me up so badly. I was pretty young. And back in those days, we had phone booths. And I went downstairs to the phone booth in the building, and I pretended I was on a call and cried for a little minute. Like I decided right then and there, I'm going to be the boss someday, and I'm never going to do that to someone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's why it's so important. I feel like we're going on so many different divergent topics here, but they all are going to come together. I promise you guys. But this idea of women empowering women, I just I always try to have the contrarian point of view, because that has never really been my experience. But what I do say when I'm mentoring young women and even young men too, it's, how can I not be that person who pretty much put me down just because
Yeah.
of their ego or because of their title? And even
Yeah.
though I had something important to say, they actually shut me down. And so I try to be cognizant of that when I am actually in spaces where I can offer advice or I can actually speak the truth that people do want to hear.
Right.
Because then as a team, it helps us, as a group, whatever company you're in. So as the leader, allowing an environment where your people can speak up, and maybe challenge you, maybe not in front of people, but whatever the case is, but there has to be that space of safety.
Yeah. I assume
Within a
now
team.
that the people who are in my room with me, if I've hired them and they're smarter than me. They're younger, they've got access to new technology, and I want them to challenge me. I don't want them to let me make a mistake.
Yes.
I think, and when you say team, that's kind of become a buzzword. My company was called Team Jenn back in the day when it wasn't really a thing yet. And
Right.
and I was always on sports teams, and I was a team person. When you and I are with a client, they get the value of both of our brains,
Right.
not just one brain. I mean, a client is going to want a team that is collaborative that way. There's just no escaping that fact. So it's
Yep.
poor leadership to be any other way.
Yes, exactly. So let's go into the psychology of skydiving, because I've actually skydived. I skydived once. And that was a pretty interesting experience. You talk about fear, everyone kind of works around like, oh, I don't have fear. And, but man, jumping out of a plane was quite, it's
Exciting.
It was
Right?
exciting.
Yeah.
But it was also interesting the amount of preparation that was involved prior to even getting on the plane. And then even in the plane, there was still additional preparation prior to jumping out of the plane. And then when you jump out of the plane, there is still sort of like guidelines on what you should do, not do in
Mhm.
order to have a safe landing. So can you walk us through that? Because what I want to do from that information is then segue into how business owners, startup founders can start thinking about M&A in relation to the psychology of skydiving.
Right. So I encourage anyone listening who thinks they might ever maybe want to do a skydive just to immediately go out and do it. So Belinda, did you do a tandem skydive where you were with another skydiver, or did you do you with two accelerated free fall with two guys on either side of you?
So it was it was a tandem skydive for sure.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't want the accelerated free fall. So my girlfriend didn't know the difference and I did. So I actually had him slow me down
Mm-hmm.
because I just wanted to really take
Enjoy
it.
it. Right. That's what I would always recommend. Going tandem is like going on a really great ride where you have the choice to pull your own parachute. If you forget, they do it for you.
Right.
And half the people do forget. They're so
Yeah.
excited, right? So I use skydiving in illusions in every part of my life now.
Mm.
And I don't skydive anymore. I'm old now, and it's like landing is a big problem for me. My body's pretty wrecked. Um, but that was how I identified for a long time. I would sit in a movie theater and look around and go, I wonder if anyone else in here is a skydiver. I'm a skydiver, right? And I was proud to do something like that. Um, in skydiving, the big thing is you jump out of a plane, you blow all the cobwebs out of your brain. When you jump, you are focused, right? You cannot be skydiving and thinking about what you need to buy at the grocery store on the way home from the drop zone. That is just not happening. So it's a great mental health thing. When you meditate and they tell you, oh, stare at a flame, remove everything else from your mind.
Yep.
Believe it or not, skydiving, even it's at 100 miles an hour, has that meditative quality of focusing you on one thing that's really important.
Yes.
So it's really great mental practice, right? And then when you can only practice 7 minutes on a Saturday, it means that the rest of the time you are visualizing your performance in your head. So, for example, if I have to go golfing, if I have to ski something difficult, I may visualize it first, stand there for a second and visualize it. Or at the beginning of a really difficult business day, I will envision myself getting through it, powering through it, and feeling good at the end, from beginning to end. I don't visualize one bit of it. It's preparation to sticking the landing to debriefing, right? So everything you said, you when you are skydiving, you have to practice a lot and you have to prepare. So in deals, you should never just go, I think I'm going to sell to them because this one person said they'd buy my company. I haven't really thought about it. Skydiving is not something you just go up in a plane, strap a parachute on, and jump out. That's unwise. So I would always say to my employees too, and my clients, we had evaluation forms for our deals and for our employees that were, okay, preparation, just like you did. Have you talked to the experts? Have you gotten guidance? So before you do a skydive, you have a coach, you have a camera person, you look at other video. People listening might not understand. I did 4-way, which means 4 people are on a team and there's a cameraman. And you jump out of the plane together. You have to practice together. You have to load the plane together. Even the cameraman has to be there. When you're in a skydive, if you lose eye contact with the other people on your team, you fly away from them at 100 miles an hour. You have to maintain proximity and pressure into each other all the time. And when you're doing a deal, you prepare your team. your team needs to be cohesive. Everybody needs to envision what that transaction is going to look like and agree on it. You can't have one person who isn't agreeing, or you won't score at all, right? In skydiving, you get scored on points, the number of formations that your four-way team builds from exit of the plane at 13,000 feet to break off, which is 3,000 feet. You have about 10,000 feet to make as many formations as you can, showing complete break in between. So it's a lot like deal making. You get your team together, you agree. Then you go to your separate corners, you come back and you go, all right, I don't like the way that is structured. We need to consult with a tax expert.
Yep.
Okay, now we're going to break. I come back together. I don't agree on the valuation we're getting. We need to talk to a valuation expert. So that practice, that teamwork is critical. I do not believe that transactions go very well, at least in my experience, when one person on the team is not into it, because that starts everything wrong, right? You can't have three people where one of them is just really unhappy. The only times that seems to work is when they already aren't a team and they're selling because they don't like each other to begin with.
Right.
And that means they're not a team.
Yeah.
And you're trying to sell them into team camaraderie somehow. And it's very difficult, right?
Yep.
So the practice and the visualization on the ground before are akin to when I've heard you talk about preparing and how you need a couple years to prepare for a really nice exit or a deal or an acquisition of another company. There's a lot of time where the team is just together, eating together, traveling to meetings together with the buyer and seller at the same table, creating some sort of common DNA, right? So then you load up, you get in the plane, and during that process, you have a deal, you're all going to exit the plane together, but you still haven't. You're in the plane, and everybody in a skydiving plane has their eyes closed and they're visualizing. I'm sure you remember seeing all the team people closing their eyes and visualizing, and it's kind of crazy, right? They're practicing in their head.
Oh yeah.
Well, did you remember that?
Oh yeah, I do. It was I was like, oh, this is kind of interesting. And at that time, I don't think I had even started meditating, so I didn't really quite get it. But yeah, there was really a lot important.
Of that. My coach told me when I joined a team, I only had like 150 skydives or something. I had a very low number of skydives compared to the other people who had, I capped it, already had 1,000 jumps. And he said, it's okay, you can catch up by visualizing in your head. So every night in my living room, I was stomach down on the floor, assuming the position, practicing, right? So he taught me the value of your brain and all these things, and how if you're the low man on the pole, you can get there by hard work and practice in your head. So as you're doing a deal, you've got buyers and sellers, everybody's in the plane, and visualizing their outcome. And this is where being on a team is really important. Everybody wants to know how the deal is going to affect them personally. But really good team leaders think about the collective, because in the end, that works out for them too, right? So as you're in that plane together, you have to continue on the same track. It's very expensive to turn around and land the plane and refuel and take off again. It's unthinkable. So what happens?
Unthinkable because you're already up there, and then maybe because to relate it to an M&A deal, it's like you get there, and then there is and we're working on this right now. Actually, there's a little bit of a block, whatever that block is, and then maybe to now try and backtrack after you've put in all of that work it really does take a lot.
It's so hard. And when people talk about deal fatigue, think about if you got up your guts to get in a plane and go skydiving, and something happened and they landed it. A lot of first timers would go, forget it. I can never get my guts up again. I just don't have the energy. I can't come back tomorrow. Or the guy, flying the plane is like, I don't have the money for more fuel. I just have to get back to work now, right?
Right.
And the other thing is that while you're in the plane and all that's going on, life is going on the ground and you're not thinking about it. And
Right.
in deals, people get so caught up in their deal making that they forget about life on the ground and they mismanage, the family that's still working down there, the people operating the airfield, the people fueling the planes. You can't forget about all the support people and your clients and things while you're doing a deal. So skydiving is like that too, because you get in that plane and it's hard to remember there's a lot of other stuff that you still have to be paying attention to, right? Because you're single threaded, you're focused, right?
Yep.
And then when you get to altitude and you have to get out of a plane, when you're team jumping, everybody crams into the door together. Everybody's, some people are hanging off the plane and some people are still in it.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how deals are too, right?
Yes.
Some people are like, I'm ready to go. And you have to do the count. 1, 2, 3, go.
Yeah.
And you have to get everybody to exit the plane at the exact same time, which is really interesting in deals. You know how that works out. People are like, oh, we're going to close tomorrow. Oh no, now we got a problem with the bank. Oh, now we've got to talk to this tax attorney who's got one client on one team who has one objection to the documents. That drives me nuts when it's like, okay, really, you couldn't have brought that up before we loaded the plane and got this far, and now
now
that makes me absolutely nutty, right? But then everybody has to leave the plane, and then I think about being in free fall is that period when you have your deal and you have to get the public to understand it. You have to get the people doing the flying to stay together. And you have to make sure that when you land it, it looks really pretty and nobody's breaking ankles and things like that, right? You said you have to stick that landing safely.
Yes.
And you don't land as a unit usually, right? So in skydiving, you break apart, you land separately. So you keep it all together. And then there is a time after a deal that I call it change management. I don't know what everybody else calls it, transition, whatever.
Integration.
Yes, it's very hard. So say that you have a skydive that didn't go that well, where one team member wasn't focused enough, or you screw something up. It's very easy to land, go to the debriefing room with the cameraman and start to point fingers. It takes a while to get through it. The coach has to help you. And then at the end, everybody's learned from the mistakes. And then you practice and you do it again, right? And practicing in skydiving is fairly humbling. You know how those mechanics lay on things that slide under cars?
Yeah.
They're called creepers in skydiving. You put your stomach down on the creeper and you're on a cement pad, and so that you're on your stomach, but it looks like it'll look in the sky, so you can practice. And then you do the camera debrief. And in deal making, this preparation is so important. As you know, it can take years.
Oh yeah, it takes years.
Yes. I mean, the prep should take years. The deal itself, that ride to altitude, should be fairly finite once you've gotten to that point. If everybody's aligned, if everybody's on the same page with the same goal in mind, right? But it's interesting that after you land, that's when you can get in disagreements and stuff. And I find that there's a lot of period. I mean, even for me, when I joined Armanino, people make fun of me still, and it's a story I tell. But the first 7 months were hard. I was used to being in charge, and I had no rules, and they gave me guardrails, and I had to learn to behave in a different way.
Different culture.
Totally. Not that much different. I got to tell you, they let me be a bit of a cowgirl around here.
Okay, good.
Yes. But it's very similar. And the big thing is no fear. You really, if you sell your company, you are not going to be in charge, and you cannot look back. It's too late once you've done it.
Once you've done it,
Right. I used to say, well, if this doesn't work out, I'm going to have to find a job at, H&R Block, and everybody would laugh at me. But that's the other thing about skydiving is you do need to have a plan B, right?
Mm.
You have to have a backup. It's the rule. You have your main and you have your reserve. Your reserve canopy is for when it really goes to hell in a handbasket. And if you skydive a long time, you do have your main canopy fail you. That's something that's going to happen. So when you are visualizing, you have to also visualize failure, in my opinion. So I have worked on deals, I'm sure you have too, where you go and everything seems to be going swimmingly. And suddenly it doesn't work.
Yes.
Suddenly there is something that one of those people who isn't in, on the team, it falls apart. And I've had them fall apart at the 11th hour. This last year has been a particularly challenging time. And it could be financing. It could be a partner just not being up for it. And you have to have a plan B. And that's all about, you have to go to your reserve and be sure that all the stuff on the ground is still safe. So that you can do something. You should never assume, in my opinion, that everything is for sure going to happen. That's probably something you coach people about quite a bit.
Absolutely. So the way I like to say it in relation to skydiving is the planning phase. And the planning phase typically, ideally, should take anywhere from 1 year to 5 years. Because there's a lot that needs to be discovered within a business, right? So that planning phase needs to be done. That's why we will never take on a client who just comes and says, I want to sell. I want to sell today.
Mm-hmm.
And I say, okay, so tell me about your business. How have you prepared and shaped your business to be sellable? Because I'm always thinking about the end in mind. Have you spoken to a tax advisor? Have you spoken to someone who's good at wealth? If it's a cross-border transaction, we might need to bring in not only just those experts, but we're going to need to bring in someone who is actually very familiar with maybe international law.
Over there,
right?
Yeah.
So now you're going to have 2 sets of experts in order to be able to execute on a deal.
Yep.
Right. And now, so that's just let's all get together in the room.
Yeah, there's risk to manage, right?
There's a lot of risk to manage.
Talk about it, and the word gets out on the street. There's a lot of risk. You can lose your business if people get the wrong messaging. It's pretty scary.
It's very scary, but it's good to be able to have someone who understands that end game, and that's why I always tell business owners, I say, you need to a lot of times when we start businesses, there is this idea of a business plan, but no one really talks about an exit plan. And so when business owners now want to sell, and you're that voice of reason in the room that says, hey, listen, you might need to take maybe a year or 2 to fix X, Y, and Z prior to going out to sell, and they don't want to hear it. And what happens is they end up not being sellable. Nobody wants to buy a job. People want to buy a business, not a job. And so maybe you can speak to that because you've had that post-exit experience. As a founder, what did you do? You ran your business for 25 years. At what point did you say, I'm ready to sell? And what did you do internally to position yourself to be acquired?
So there's a couple things that come to my head. So internally, I really invested in training. We had a NextGen training to get that. Clever, right?
Yes.
But I needed to train not just a successor, but a team. And I had 8 people that I invested in. And that was everything from skills to leadership training, to coaching them to be good leaders, I had to start making sure they were visible to my clients. This is something, you know, that every leader needs to do. Otherwise, you know, everything hangs on you, right? The other thing was I had to network a lot. I had to make sure people knew me and knew what my company was. And further to that, I had to actually talk about my product and what I did and why it was unique, which was great for business development, right? So I was growing. I wasn't flat. I was business developing, getting new clients all the time. And I was really eager to tell the world about what I considered outsourcing, which was a team approach, an accounting department, not a fractional CFO. I was like, no, you need way more than that. So I talked about my product and I networked. And I let certain strategic people in my life who I trusted know that I would be open to an offer if it were the right offer. Okay, I didn't want everybody coming at me. And so I was building my team. I then went shopping for technology. This is where you have a main and a reserve. So I went shopping. I needed to upgrade the technology for almost 50 of my people and hundreds of clients. I had like 90 regular day-to-day clients and like 150 that were in and out the door every year. So if you think about upgrading the technology of one company, think about doing it for 100, right? So I really went after the technology. And again, I was sort of visualizing that in terms of as a skydiver, you don't want to have a nasty old canopy and not the right altimeter. It needs to be accurate, right?
Yeah.
I wanted someone to come in and go, okay, that works. If Jen gets hit by a car, she's got a leadership team and she's got the technology and her clients trust her. She's managed her clients to change. The clients are ready for this. They knew it was coming. Now, the main and the backup thing. On the technology, I believe that, you know, everything is going so fast right now. I mean, you're way younger than me, but oh my God, it is so hard to keep up with, right? Yes. So I was like, okay, I'm going to see if I can invest in hundreds of thousands of dollars of technology for my clients. Or can I find a buyer who will invest in the technology because they want my clients and my team? So I had my plan A and B. I was like, either I'll end up with great tech and I'll do it, or someone will bring it to me. Because a buyer sometimes wants to see where they can fill the void, where they have something to offer you and they are that puzzle piece. So I decided in my little tiny world that technology was the piece that I needed, really more than money, right? And then in terms of practicing as a seller, you have to decide what you really want. So I always encourage people to go see their wealth advisor and don't just wait till someone says, oh, hey, I'll give you a couple $1,000,000 bucks. Instead, know your number. What is your number if you're 45 years old? If you're 50 years old, what is the number that you need to make it worth doing so that you could, if the deal went super bad, you could quit, right?
Yeah.
You need, how much of an earnout do I need to survive? What's
or
the
do you
number?
even need an earnout? You know, because I think this is where, you know, I know earnout is a in market or to market thing right now in today's M&A world. But you could actually avoid that if you build the business to where you can walk away and hand the keys to somebody. But if you've not done that, then yes, you should.
Well, that's plan A or plan B again, your reserve, right? I would have needed another 3 years to build my team to be a turnkey operation, or I could join Armanino and stick it out for 3 years or whatever. I think they made me do 5. I can't even remember right now. But if your name's on the door, and in my case, it was really super kitschy. It was Team Jen. It wasn't McCabe and Company or something prouder. It had evolved accidentally because I was always on team sports, right? But plan A is they can walk in and the company works without you. Plan B is they help you with the succession planning. And in my case, that was definitely a part of what I wanted. And then the other thing is that you have your number, right? That's almost like the easy thing, but believe it or not, so many sellers don't know what their number is. And then they settle for something that sounds good enough without really intelligently knowing if that's a good number. So the valuation stuff for me was very important. And then I hired I had actually 2 advisors that I constantly played off each other.
Let me just stop there for a second, because I think that's really interesting, is that you had the expertise. Okay, most sellers don't have the expertise. They know their businesses well, but they don't know how to buy. They don't know how to sell companies, at least the first time or the first few go rounds. I think what's fascinating here is that you, as a financial expert, knew the landscape. It sounded like you went out, you were networking and building your business development, but also your advisory team. And you still went out and sought advice from an M&A advisor and other experts.
2 of them.
Exactly. Okay.
They didn't want to work together, and I made them.
Okay. And so why?
Because it was okay that they didn't agree.
Okay.
It became a 3-way discussion for me about my value, for example, about whether I was ready to sell, for example. I worked on mine, like working up toward it for about 2.5 years.
Okay.
All the time thinking it may not work. It may not work. I always have to have my plan B. It may fall apart, because I'd seen my clients' deals fall apart at the last minute. So
right.
I was smart enough to know all the things that could go wrong. I was smart enough to know that the first year after selling is a misery.
Yes.
Okay. It doesn't matter that you just got a chunk of cash. It's hard, but still, I thought it was going to be easy for me. Just so you know, that was the part I got wrong. It was that first 7 months was super hard. I cried on the way.
We're going to talk about that, because I think that's a pretty, even more so than the actual transaction itself.
Yes.
The post-exit, post-acquisition stage is critical. And this is where 80% of M&A activity actually doesn't translate as initially visualized and as initially planned. And this is across the board for publicly traded companies, for privately held companies. So you hired 2 M&A advisors, and they were able to sort of be the counter, they were able to counter off each other in order to give you that sort of holistic type of advice. Did you have a tax advisor or wealth advisor in addition to those? And at what point did you bring that piece of expertise into?
So I had a tax partner of mine. Early in my career, I did tax stuff.
Okay.
And I was happy to give him that piece of my business and the revenue that went with it. I didn't want tax work because it's looking backward. You know, like I just got my tax done last week, and my poor tax people were thinking about 23, and all I can think about is 25, right?
Yeah.
So I had gotten rid of my own little tax practice, and it was really dinky. And I was so glad. And he and I both dropped out of big business and started our firms at the same time. So we were same generation, and I was able to bounce things off of him throughout the process. And when I hired an attorney, that's another person on your team. I mean, this is all an investment, right?
Yes.
You invest in tax advice, legal advice, broker advice, and you've got to talk to an investment banker. Well, my tax guy was there every step of the way, helping me figure it out. And when you talk about the timeline, so if you don't do enough preparation, you spend a lot of time on the debrief, the part afterward that's harder. So say you shorten the time to go to market to sell your company, the post-deal time is longer. So in my case, I spent 2.5 years prepping and dealing with all my details. If I had spent 5 years prepping, I probably would have had a shorter earnout and maybe an easier transition. I kind of think when I talk to people about it, Belinda, I kind of say to them, look, this is 7 years of your life.
Yep.
Period. End of story. And don't think for a minute that it's going to be an easy peasy thing. So it's on the front end or the back end.
Yeah, just right. If you're not willing to do the work up front to prepare, to plan, to make sure that you have a leadership team in place, and not from a nepotism standpoint, because we also see that a lot in privately held companies where it's Aunt Sally and Uncle Frank that are the accountants, and that's how you want to sell your business. Then sorry, you're going to have maybe 1 year to sell your business, but you're going to have 6 years that you're going to have to figure out how you're going to integrate with that buyer and work alongside that buyer in order for them to be able to realize the value of your company, if at all.
I think it's really hard for family businesses.
Yeah.
I think it's really hard. It's hard for the buyer. It's not culture at that point. It's family.
Yes. It's family.
It's not integrating cultures. It's like DNA, at which, that doesn't happen.
Yes.
And so that's why,
that's why it's so important for them to, I think even more so for them, because it's really, it's like you said, it's the DNA, it's the family. And so if you can figure out a way to create another layer or a layer of a management team that, number one, has the expertise, has the skills, has received that training. So then that way, when you do transition, there is a layer of managers that can actually run the company without the family or without the owner's involvement.
Yeah.
So let's talk about, you talked about networking. I thought that was interesting. Tell me more. Networking as part of your exit strategy.
Yes. So part of the reason I was on a great skydiving team was that I worked the drop zone. I wanted to get the best coach. I wanted to be on a really good team of other equally committed people. I didn't want to join a team just for fun. I wanted a team that was going to win. And that's just me. I'm competitive.
Yeah.
And it was really important to pick the right coach. Okay. That's all about networking. Coaches pick you too. They have to want to work with you. If you network, and I tell all the people who work for me too, you get opportunities because you're known. People know you and hopefully your product.
Yeah.
That gets doors opened because you're top of mind. Now, if I network and I don't ever see someone again, that's not networking. It's hard work. Networking is hard work. And, here now, my new job is pretty much networking. It's interesting that I'm telling you this. And my boss, Matt Armanino, says, oh, your new job next year, it's easy for you. It's just what you do. And as I'm speaking to you, I'm thinking about what he said and thinking maybe he's right. But you got to get out there and talk to people about what you're doing, because that's how you grow your business and your footprint. And if you're interested in growth, and if people are talking to you, Belinda, they're interested in growth.
Yeah.
You don't run into companies that are just steady, steady, steady and totally happy with that. You meet people who are ambitious. So if you're ambitious, you have to be out and memorable and seeing people. And if you're going to sell your company, you need to get out there so you know who might be a good buyer. Just because you think that those people who called you and offered you $5 million are a good buyer doesn't mean they are. So I have the most frustrating conversations with people who want to sell their company because they got one offer. Again, it's plan A and plan B. You have to have a backup plan. You have to have 2 offers. You've got to have at least 2 and hopefully more. And that's where someone like you comes in and is absolutely critical. So an investment banker helps you network. Like those books you put together when you go to market, that's just a ginormous networking operation. We call it branding and selling and stuff, but it's networking you. It's getting you exposed to people. Hopefully it's getting you to go out and shake hands and kiss babies and talk to people and see who fits you, not just your number.
Right.
But your culture. So say the number isn't perfect, but it's a company that you like so much that you could actually work with them for 3 years, because then you're going to get your number. How are you going to do that if you haven't met anybody?
Right. And also I think it's, and the reason why I prefer to actually do that long-term planning, I'd much rather someone said to me, okay, Belinda, this is our number. And I can say, okay, here's your valuation as it is, as your company is today. Let's have a conversation on how we can get you to close the gap between that number and where you are today. But if that conversation is not had, and if a strategy is not devised and developed based on what the company's resources are, based on where I, as the investment banker, because I have access to the database, I have access to the research, I have access to the insights, I can say, well, this is what's going on in the industry. This is what's going on in your company. And this is what's going on in the regulatory environment. So now we can actually plan and say, okay, in 3 to 5 years, where do we see things going? And how can we back into that number? What do you need to do? So those are the conversations I much rather have, early on. So then that way, when it's time for me now to bring my powerhouse from a buyer perspective, I can maybe help you with the networking piece. I can say, okay, maybe you should connect with this company, maybe start having conversations with them and just pick their brain. And there has to be a lot of planning done. And I just
and
find,
it's not just networking for growth either. It's networking for finding new employees that are critical to your growth. It's networking to find a great cost consultant. And, in your world, that's a big thing. Negotiating with your vendors to save money, to increase your margin. So you want to, obviously, you can make more money if you sell a lot more, but you also need to keep your pressure on your costs and your numbers so that you can show continuous improvement or the ability to scale. Networking helps you with every aspect of that. We are tribal creatures. We need each other.
Right.
And I think that if you operate a business as an owner in a vacuum, or say you have a leadership team around you that's afraid to tell you the truth, same difference. It's like you're in a cave. You can't possibly do anything the right way. You have to be open to continuous listening and learning. Make yourself better all the time. Why would a buyer want you if there was no upside too? Like, some people try to be perfect. I don't know that I believe in that. I think it's best if a buyer says we can help them get there.
Yeah, we can help them get there. And by acquiring them, it's actually going to be accretive value to us, right? They have to be able to see the value of why they're acquiring you. They're not just buying your business to buy your business, right? There has to be some strategic value, whether maybe that's part of a roll-up strategy, or maybe you're going to be a wholly independent. The structures can go across the board. It doesn't really matter. It's just really understanding what value you bring to the table.
I like to ask people to think like a buyer too. When they're thinking about selling, I say, okay, wipe your mind clean. Think for a sec that you're a buyer, not about your business, because they tend to be very critical about their own business and see all the faults in it. What would you look for? What would you want to see that wasn't perfect that you could add? Like, what kind of business do you know how to make better? Is it just like yours? If so, that's what we're going to look for. Is it like yours? That's a fun way to make people think. Because people get way single threaded about their own business. And, I had a hard time in the beginning with my advisors. They would tell me to do things like increase my prices. And I was like, oh, no. We can't do that. And here's why. It took me literally months to come around to understanding I needed to raise my prices.
Right. Yeah. And it's little things like that. I mean, I even had a seller come to me recently, and she wants a $10 million valuation on subpar $5 million revenue. Maybe, maybe not. But what was interesting was her net working capital. It took her like maybe 90 to 120 days to collect. And can we have a conversation about this? Trying to get her to understand why that could be
the loss there, what she's losing.
What she's going to lose if she doesn't even forget even if it's $5 million revenue. It talks about not being perfect. It's not about being $1 billion valuation company. That's not what M&A is about.
Yeah.
M&A is about the value that occurs when two entities come together. And so when I was speaking with her, that was the red flag for me. It wasn't about her revenues. It wasn't even about maybe just some of the other things. I was like, if you're unable to collect your accounts receivables, your payables, and you're talking 90, 120 days plus, how about we start fixing that first before? And the unfortunate thing is that she actually had a buyer. She had a buyer at the door, and I was like, you're not, it's, I don't know, it's not going to happen. So from your perspective, can you explain to the audience why that in that scenario, why that would not, why she would lose?
Why she would lose something?
Yes, if she did not take care of something as simple as accounts receivables.
Well, I mean, a buyer, in my experience, buyers do a lot of cash flow modeling.
Mhm.
Now, I'm not sure she would lose the buyer, but a buyer may actually have a negotiating lead on her.
Yes.
Where they would negotiate the ending net working capital number to their advantage, penalize her basically for it.
Correct.
And reduce the value that she gets for her company because she has an operational shortcoming, which should be pretty easy to fix.
Yes.
That's the thing about that one that's really frustrating. Like if it were a big one, like technology needing to be overhauled or something, I would give her a pass. But you know, that's one of those things that to me, and you know what, it happens in a lot of my clients' businesses. It's happened in my own business before. That particular mistake is, I don't want to say this too loudly, but it's almost laziness. It's, and then on top of that, what I see people do is fail to bill. They bill late. So in addition to collecting late, they bill late. And that drives me nuts.
Yes.
Because that can turn into 4 months of lost cash flow very quickly, if not 6.
Yeah.
Right.
And can you talk about why cash flow is important? So the audience that we have are of, I guess, 2 buckets. So you have established companies, and then you have startup founders. Obviously, with startup founders, because some of them are a lot of tech companies, so profitability is really not a huge factor when it comes to the valuation. So that might maybe be a different strategy.
It's becoming more of one. People are less forgiving about that every year.
Yes, and I realize now that the reason why a lot of VCs are having a hard time exiting their companies or the portfolio investments is because of this issue.
Pre-revenue for too long. That pre-revenue is a fancy way of saying not profitable. Yeah. And it's sort of like when you have a teenage kid and you forgive them for not making their bed a certain number of days. And then at a certain point, it's like, grow up.
Yeah. Yeah. Grow up. And also, and even in situations where you have startups that are year over year, annual growth, 100% plus, I struggle with this because they have this, the VCs and also the founders have this mindset that it's okay to keep raising capital in order to operate the company, which is fine because that's the model for VCs, right? But I'm just curious to know, at what point should startups start to put pressure on costs, slow down hiring in order to start turning the profits? Because they are growing, the revenue is growing. It's just,
well, I am a VC investor. That's my favorite place to be. Okay, of risk and all the things that I told you I love, right? I love founders and I love A and B level. When it gets to C and D, I generally cannot be talked into it. That's just a personal thing about me. I'm like, really? How long have you been doing this? In my opinion, you have to invest in a certain baseline of your support structure. If you're going to build a company, you've got to have your back office, you've got to have your technology and your operations. Boom. And then you better be figuring out how to turn revenue. So the only way that you can talk someone into giving you money is if you tell them exactly when they're going to get it back. After you get past B and you get to C, you need to be able to say to someone, yes, I need more money, but it's okay because in 3 years, I'm going to give it back to you 2X. And here's my model. And here's my product development. Here's my sales and marketing plan. It has to be very sophisticated. So a pre-revenue company in the C and Ds to me has to have the fruits of that operation spending very evident. And I'm talking like a graduate of the dot-com crisis because I am one. Okay.
Yes,
I mean, I'm old enough to have gone through that nightmare where
yeah.
everybody had a C title and was, riding around the office on a skateboard or a scooter and playing pool in the middle of the day. And I became very disenchanted with this idea that it's okay to be pre-revenue. It's okay to be pre-revenue for a time, providing you put an end date on that time. I'm not giving anybody my money unless they tell me how and when I'm getting it back.
Yeah.
So, some people are different. They can throw $75,000 at someone and go, that's a bright, shiny object. I could do that or buy 10 pairs of shoes. So I'm going to do that. But most people want to get their money back. The other thing about not having, negative cash flow is that, like, say that you're in a small business. You're not a VC funded fancy technology company. You're just a startup. If you don't cash flow your business, you have to borrow.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't just cost money and interest. Most banks then also require you to have more accounting costs because you have to have audits or reviews of your financials, so they'll keep lending you the money. Yep. So it becomes very expensive quickly. And the only way you can justify it is if you're not giving away more equity and getting money from your investors. Okay. When people are really quick to ask for money from investors and not willing to borrow, that's another sign to me that they really don't want their own selves on the line. I like to be in it with an owner who is at risk, who is signing the checks, who has to use the money to put the kids through college. That's what appeals to me. So I'm talking like a startup to middle market person right now, but my company was a startup and most of my companies were startups to middle market that I managed. And that's very profitable because it's a higher risk and high reward. Your multiples are much bigger at that point.
At that point. Yeah, absolutely. I think it's, when you look at companies like Uber, like I love Uber, right? But my goodness, when did it get in? When did it IPO? I think it was in 2019.
Yeah, it was right around COVID, wasn't it?
Yeah, right before COVID. And, it took them, I want to say 4 or 5 years just before. It wasn't until 2023 that they actually started showing profitability.
They had a very obvious product. They were doing networking, right?
Yes.
Lots of networking can be called branding or marketing by another name.
Yeah.
And there was promise in it. It was becoming a product that was ubiquitous, a brand name. That most people aren't that. Most people are not that. They don't have that luxury. They need to manage their cash. They need to manage their investors. I mean, when you sell your company, the concept of the net working capital that you leave in the business drives me nuts too, because some people, that's a negotiated number, as you know. Right. And a lot of sellers that I work with don't understand this, but say that you are in manufacturing and distribution. You're keeping your accounting on an accrual basis.
Right.
Okay. You're matching your costs and your revenue. So most of the time you're also having to deal with taxes that way. Once you scale to a certain level, your taxes are that way. So say that you've booked revenue, you've got profit on the books, but you've done a lousy job of collecting money and billing on time. You're paying tax on money you don't have. Okay, that's one problem. So when you sell, you can catch up with it. The other thing that I see with founders is that they leave their cash in their business because it's their best investment. It's the highest return on their money. And then they go to sell their company and they've got all this cash in the company. They've been paying tax on that. They have already paid tax on it. The buyer takes the company with the cash that the seller paid tax on. Investment bankers don't always understand that either.
Yes.
And so I always counsel people in preparing for a sale, leave only enough cash in that business to fund it for 3 months, baby, just 3 months. And put the money over here as your plan B reserve money, not where a buyer can see it. Don't give away the kitty. So cash is a really interesting thing. It's totally separate from accounting. Accounting is regardless of where the cash lands, accounting has to be done accurately. But cash management is a completely different animal. That's finance. That's not accounting.
Yes, exactly. And it's also it's important, and this is why the planning stage is so important, right? To be able to figure this out, to be able to do a Q of E, which I would love for you to explain what the purpose of a Q of E, because, and what the Q of E is, a quality of earnings is what it means. And the reason why it's done, maybe if you can talk to people a little bit about that and why.
I'm going to dumb it down. Let's not use acronyms. Like all of us walk around talking Q of E, and
quality of earnings report.
Right. I mean, business owners have no idea what I'm talking about. And I go, okay, a quality of earnings report is not necessarily an audit of all of your books, but it says the revenue that is reported by this company is real. That's all it is. And that you've reported it accurately. So what we see a lot of times in this, and I'll put it in the simplest of terms for myself, but we find that people report their earnings in the wrong year quite often. So a really dumb example is I had a deal that we were doing where they had contracts with clients where part of the contract was basically a subscription. And the other part was right now a project that has to be delivered in 3 months. That means that even though they give you a fee that is $50,000 a month or whatever it is, you have to recognize the revenue differently. You have to recognize it in a big chunk. And usually the way this company operated was the big chunk was fourth quarter, and the rest of it had to be petered out over the next 12 months. Well, they were recognizing their revenue incorrectly. So it was lumped into the wrong periods, which meant that the valuation therefore was wrong, because the valuation was based on their net profit, based on their financials. And their financials were driven. I mean, think about just your revenue. A QV is really only focused on the top line, doesn't matter about anything else. And it's your big number. It has to be reported in exactly the right period. If not the right month, at least the right quarter, right? And so this particular QV moved their revenue around and across financial reporting periods to a point that it impacted the valuation, okay? It's not all timing differences when you look back 3 years. If you've collected a whole bunch of money, that's actually what we call a liability, meaning we collect in advance. Love that for cash flow, right? Love it. Got all this money in the bank. My clients prepaid me. But if you've accidentally recognized that as revenue, you have overstated your value, because in fact, you owe people your product. You owe people a service. So it can be a really egregious mistake. And because you multiply 10x, 7x, 20x, this little mistake is a 20 times gigantuan error.
Yes. And which then means that needs to be put in the back pocket from a negotiation standpoint as you go through due diligence. So then that way.
Spoken like a banker. Yes, exactly.
So whether it's
when you do your Q of E, you can go, maybe they won't notice.
Because, well, they could notice, because now every buyer actually does their own Q of E. So Jenn, let me ask you, if every buyer does their own Q of E, and I tell this to people, I try to explain to people, it doesn't matter if you're $5 million valuation or $1 billion valuation. the person who is buying your company, if they're not an individual, so let's just say private equity, corporate strategic, joint venture, whatever the case may be, they have a fiduciary duty to their investors. So it doesn't matter the size of the transaction, they have to do the same quality of due diligence, regardless of the transaction value. So a lot of business owners and startups are always like, why is the due diligence such a big deal? And it's a big deal because of the other party's responsibility to whoever is behind them, whoever is going to finance this transaction. So can we talk about this aspect?
The why is trust. You're selling your company, but in your advanced networking and work that you're doing with the culture and stuff is you're building trust.
Right.
So I think of it as, this is an insurance policy. I have been diligent about my company. I know my mistakes. I know my errors because I've identified them myself. Generally speaking, the buyer's QV should be pretty easy. If you've done a really good job with a reputable firm, they may actually skip it. And I've seen them skip it if a good firm does the QV first. And it's kind of nice sometimes to have someone do a QV. They can do it if they're also advising you for years and years on your tax or your accounting. Like our clients where we do the outsourced accounting, we can still work on the QV and we can work on it for a couple of years. And then we've got this beautiful report. They know they've got really solid financials. It's like a warranty. If you're going to buy a car and somebody says, here's the warranty, I made it, it's in good shape, I'm willing to give you the warranty that if it breaks, I'll fix it because I'm pretty sure it isn't broken. That is what you're saying. You're saying it's not broken.
Yeah, I like that. And can you talk about technology? And especially now in today's environment where there's a lot of industrial transformation across the board with AI.
Yeah.
I know you guys are actually
You're
doing
giving
a
me
lot.
a panic attack just bringing up the word. Okay. So I can talk about it, but I can't do it. I'm a person who buys a phone that my kids can help me fix, just so we're clear.
Okay.
So here at Armanino, we have people who are so good at it that I don't really have to be. So I'm not passing on the question because you told me I could, but I am saying that if you are not good at it, like I am not good at it, you must invest in having people work for you who are good at it, not just invest in the technology. So the worst mistake you could ever make is invest in technology and then not know how to use it. Right?
Okay. Yeah.
You got
Absolutely.
to do that. AI is the whole thing now. I mean, around here we say, well, you can't say Armanino without AI in it. You know, it is a part of our everyday life here.
Right.
You need to have experts on that. The world operates that way. I know you're heavy into manufacturing and distribution, and in what I see on those calls and meetings that I'm in, and I am not the expert that my team is that without technology, when you're making stuff, you're making a product, you can't scale.
Yes.
The cost to make each thingamajob is very expensive if you're doing things over and over and over again, and it takes a lot of labor. If you can take all those repetitive things and have somebody else who's not a person do them, you can actually scale, you can sell more, and your margin grows. So in most businesses, that's critical.
Okay. Because I know you mentioned it as part of your exit planning process when you were thinking about selling your company, which was a service-based company.
Yep.
You were thinking about technology. So did you end up having to invest in the technology and hire for the technology, or was that part of the?
So I was hiring. I hired a guy at another firm, another accounting firm, that helped people like me do RFPs. Okay. So we went out to market to see what technologies were out there for accounting and HR and payroll. what could bring accounting and HR and payroll together, and project management of all my clients, what worked. And so we had demos, and we talked about the cost and the advantages and the drawbacks. We talked about the time to convert. Should we convert 20 companies at a time or 90 companies at a time? It was really this unbelievably daunting decision. You know, I don't like to dither about with decisions. I want to just, okay, let's do it. Let's go. If we screw it up, we'll do it again. It'll be fine.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So I could not make a technology decision for 90 companies and mine like that. I had to hire someone who was very methodical and helpful in evaluating my options. Then I was about to go buy that technology. I was about to hire a firm like Armanino to help me implement the technology, second phase.
Right.
And then the third, and that was how Armanino kind of came on my radar, by the way. And Matt Armanino and his colleague, Tom Meskel, were running consulting, and they were like, wait, why would you pay us hundreds of thousands of dollars when we could bring you in? You know, that's how it kind of came together, right? So it was very magical and perfect in the end. But then when you implement technology, the other mistake that people make is they don't use it the way it was intended to be used. They hack it so that it mimics their old technology and is like an upgrade instead of a revamp.
Right.
In today's day and age, technology is not an upgrade. You're not just upgrading Word to version whatever anymore. You are now what we call transforming.
Yeah.
It's not just an upgrade of a new version. So you need to hire someone who's going to help you figure out what to do and map it for you. This is huge advice. Map it. Tell you the time frame. What technology are you going to buy? Then you need to hire a team to implement the technology. That's in a lot of companies, that's maybe transforming the process of making your product. It's huge. Like, what if you were making bicycles and you had to change the production line? Okay, it's gigantic.
Yeah.
Well, then say you do that and you don't follow up by managing afterward to really get everybody on your team to use it the way it was intended. We call that, you know, managed services and technology around here. You know, you want to sign up for a subscription that forces you to use what you bought. Otherwise, it's like you bought a car and you never really drive it on the highway. You only drive it on the streets. You know, that's not what you want to do.
Yeah. How does that impact valuation? If a company decides to make this investment and if they're able to leverage the technology to its fullest capability, maybe not 100% capacity utilization, but able to actually leverage what this technology can do, how can that impact valuation?
Positively or negatively? It depends. Okay, so if you knew that you were going to sell your company, if somebody came to you and said, hey, I'm going to sell to one of these three people, and they targeted those companies and said, help me network with those companies and get noticed by them because I want to meet the CEOs. I want to talk to them about a strategic merger. What would be super smart is to figure out what technology they're using, because then if providing they are awesome, you want to be able to integrate seamlessly. Say that you find out your competitors have total crap for technology. You want to go to them and go, let me help you. You're bigger than me, but I have better technology. So it is one of those negotiating points that I think is super important. And some people overlook it in deal making. They get so focused on the financials that they completely forget that technology is going to ruin the deal.
Yep.
Or make the deal. And a buyer usually is no dum-dum. They'll go into a company and go, okay, we're not going to tell them now, but their valuation is low because we're going to have to redo everything. We're going to have to retrain all their people. If you don't have a plan for upgrading your tech with a buyer helping you, or you don't do it yourself before sale, you have to understand how to negotiate your weakness.
Yep. I agree with you. Actually, I had that situation where I think it's in the LPO space, so legal process outsourcing space. And, everyone now is kind of shifting to one or two type of tech stacks. And the client has their own tech stack because that has worked for them for 10, 15 years. And I'm like, everyone is on this one or two things. So do you think maybe you could start to switch the technology over here? And so anyways, but to your point.
Or accept a long earn out and tell them that they have to help you do it and
Exactly.
a lower valuation. You get to pick.
Yeah.
And I'm back to my main canopy or my reserve.
Yep, got it. Talk about, you mentioned clients' trust when you were thinking about selling. Did you communicate that to your customers? And if so, how did you do? Oh, no.
No, not like, hey, I'm going to do it. But as I was counseling them to exit their companies and to make it smooth for their customers, they don't want to lose their customers, right? So I would help them with that process.
Okay.
All the while in the back of my mind thinking, someday when I'm doing it for me, they're going to recognize what I'm doing. So it made me be authentic in that process. So by the time I was saying, look, you guys, here's how it's going to change. I'm not going to have control over this. Can't lie to you. The worst thing that you can do, and by the way, I've made this mistake, is to say, there's going to be nothing changing, nothing. That's wrong. I think that you need to be authentic and say, there's going to be some bumps in the beginning, but it's better in the end. That's why I did it.
Yes.
No, it's never easy. I mean, M&A, buying a company, selling a company, it's hard.
Yeah. I do have a couple more questions. So let's talk about the exit and the transition, because that's very important. It took you 7 months just to even wrap your head around the culture. You had been speaking with them, you've been networking. So it wasn't as though like they were a new entity to you. You decided,
kind of,
right? From a cultural perspective or what?
You think right? I was like, ooh, I love my new bosses. They're the greatest. Then you have a new job. And when you're a seller and a founder and you've not had a boss in 25 years and suddenly you have a boss and you're used to winning and performing well, all of a sudden, oh my God, what is his definition of winning and performing well? Oh my God. I hadn't thought of that. That just seems silly, but I hadn't going from being, in charge of my whole world to, oops, I've got to please someone else. And I want to. That was very difficult. Also, when you sell your company, a lot of times they want to change what you do. And some founders think they're just going to be able to keep doing the same thing they've always done, but that is just not what happens. They say to you, you have to stop doing that. We have people who are better at that than you. That's why you did this, remember? So would you stop? We need you to do something else. And it's very hard to reinvent yourself. The other thing that's hard, I think, for founders is, your image. It's like when people retire, you talk about, what do you say you do when people say, oh, and what do you do? A lot of people have a very hard time saying they're retired. Same thing. I'm the CEO and founder of Team Gen Corp becomes, I work at Armanino, and it's you have to figure out, because so many founders who are entrepreneurial, their self-image is that. So we don't talk about that. This is psychology. I didn't, and all of a sudden I had a new role. They also, will have different vocabulary. So a founder has their own vocabulary. The whole company uses it, and my company, we had campfires and fireside chats. A fireside chat was me talking to them. A campfire was all of us talking together and them talking to me. All of a sudden, I didn't have the cultural terminology to navigate and swim my way through every day. It's very hard to be successful by someone else's terms when you've been used to defining success your own way. And all of a sudden, I was super insecure. Personally, my experience was, at first you have this honeymoon period. I don't think it's tough on day one, because it's a honeymoon period. You're so busy transitioning your people and your clients and everything. And all of a sudden, 6 months in, you wake up and you go, wow. And all I could think about was those clients there, they didn't transition well and they are mad at me. And these employees over here, they didn't transition well. They're mad at me. I never see my family because I'm working my tail off for the man again, and they're mad at me. So I think that this is the thing that nobody wants to talk about. It sounds so great. You sell your company, and believe me, it's been fantastic for me. I am, like, as I speak to you, I cannot tell you how lucky I am. I love I love what I do and I love my colleagues. Yes. But if I went through this, it goes to, it's to be expected. It's to be expected that you have an emotional reaction that nobody wants to talk about. They want to talk about the numbers and your goals and everything. It goes well beyond that. And I would say if I were to acquire someone that, and I wish we did this here because we are acquisitive, I think that having coaching would be great for founders who suddenly become employees.
Yes. And I think that's one of the things that we do offer is that support, that post-exit integration.
That's awesome.
Just really more from a, it's more for the founder, because once we and I think that's what makes Catalyst Point different, is that we actually look at this holistically. So it's not just the planning, it's not just the actual representing them on the transaction, but now we're actually doing a post-exit integration support to the founders and the leadership team, because that culture integration, a lot of people think that I'm going to sell my company is going to be great. But a lot of startups are structured, like you said, the language is different. Even the work office
your
the
people
attire.
have a new person, they report to a different person. They're like, I don't know how to make that person happy. So these people, are disgruntled, and it's tough. And so when you skydive, you have a debrief, you review the video and stuff, and you might review it the next weekend again if it's relevant. And I think that having that debrief for a transaction, and not just a weekend, but a month in, 3 months in, and a year in, with the key people is super useful. We have a really kind of cool developing transition process here at Armanino that I'm watching, because part of it is the people, part of it is the clients. You have to have specialists on that. Get everybody, over the hump.
Yep. And I think that's important, because that's really where things go awry, and the potential value that the merger or the acquisition or whatever was supposed to generate sort of disintegrates because of that post-exit process.
You know what I see? I see when you have a leadership team that's involved in the transaction, like say your operations leader is involved, they lose sight of cash flow management. They're so focused on the deal, and their team is too lean to have a person who's working on the deal also remembering to mind the business, what's going on the ground. And so you get in a situation where right after the deal is consummated, the buyer goes, what happened to your cash flow? It went to hell in a handbasket. And that causes problems.
Yeah, that can cause problems and lawsuits too. So, but can you talk about, I'm just trying to look at my notes here and what you've said. We talked about planning, we talked about training your team, we talked about networking, not just from a business development standpoint, but also from possibly having conversations with potential buyers and trying to understand where there's synergies. You talked about maybe being more technologically enabled, especially in today's world, and being able to maximize usage of that technology. We talked about clients and trust. Can you talk about where you see yourself? Because when did you sell your company? What year did you sell your company?
I think it's 7.5 years ago now.
Okay, Jen, that's unusual that you're still there.
Oh my God, they wrote me in here so bad. So Matt Armanino, my boss, is so compelling. It's like a hurricane walks in the door. He makes me look calm. He makes me look chill. But it's, if you merge with the right company, you end up with leadership opportunities. Because if you led a company, and I was very lucky, there are many leadership opportunities here to keep me engaged. And I thought I was going to retire a couple of years ago. I was like, yeah, I'm out. My name was on the door, so they stuck me for 5 years. I wanted a 3-year, and they were like, no. You have a lot of work to do still. Because remember, I told you I prepared for 2.5 years. It was short. The deal cycle was pretty short. So I had the 5 years on the back end. So I thought I was going to be gone, but I got lucky. I got on the board here. So I had this really awesome chance to sit in the room with all the grown-ups and talk and learn. And so I thought, okay, I'll stay until the end of my board term. And recently they said, no, we have another leadership position for you now that we want you to do. And we want you to do it for 3 more years. And I had to really think about it. But if you make the right deal, and if you work super hard, it's not like it was magically the right deal. Trust me. I've had to navigate a lot of things and figure out what's right for me and where I have value. And I'm very lucky because Armanino looks at me and goes, she's not very good at that. Let's let her do something else. Also, I have professional ADD. So somehow they know that they have to reinvent a role for me all the time. Now go this, it's like a new squirrel for me to chase. Okay.
Right.
I'll do that.
Yeah. No, I just had a conversation with Lulu Waters, and we talked about she's dyslexic, and we talked about ADHD in the workplace, the future of work, and really just trying to understand how corporations, companies, businesses can actually work with different individuals that have different learning types, and being able to adjust their roles to be able to fit how they learn. And I think that's interesting that you bring that up.
I'm easily bored. I'm so easily bored. So I needed to be constantly reminded of some other new thing that would be fun for me to do. And, for me, it's about when you're older and you've created a business, what's interesting is helping create the next generation. What I'm interested in is legacy and how I'll be remembered for helping people who are coming up in the company. They may not keep in touch with me, but they might tell their kids someday that I impacted them, that I was that might only happen with 5 people that I impact, but I try really hard to have impact that helps people get ahead, so they'll remember me that way someday. And I happen to land a place that lets me do that. I go way beyond the numbers at this point in my life.
Yeah, that's incredible. And what advice would you give founders, entrepreneurs, as they navigate? I feel like the next, 2025? I feel like the next 5 years are picking up in M&A. And
I'll tell you, it's easy for me to answer that.
So give the advice.
So right now there seems to be a culture of it should be easy, should be easier. I mean, a lot of people look at me and go, I don't want to work as hard as you worked. I don't want to have kids, raise a family, and work full time. I don't believe that's workable. If you are an entrepreneur, if you are a founder, when people come to me and say, hey, I want to start my own business, I'm tired of having to work for so-and-so, I want to manage my own time, I want to have my own time, I go, I want
a 4-hour work week.
That is just such crap. I mean, so the easiest answer is, if you want to be entrepreneurial, and the risk and the reward are all yours, if you work super hard, the reward is huge. Being in a place, whether you're the founder or not, if you are in a place where your entrepreneurial spirit makes you part of a team, the rewards are amazing. But it is not an amazing reward system for people who don't work that hard. And there seems to be, a wave where, there's a band of pay. If you do this job, you get that. No, you should make more money if you work harder than your colleague, right? So hard work is number one. I also tell people you have to be self-motivated. If if you're going to found a company, you can't be motivated because your spouse is telling you to do something. You have to have this inner turmoil if you're not moving in a direction. One of my closest people in life, everyone called him a shark because he always had to be moving. That made him a great entrepreneur. He was the motivator for his whole company. He had to be moving. I also tell people, try everything. Don't be afraid. My no fear mentality. Try. And I say, if you're not living on the edge, you're not living. That somebody said that a long time ago. And I thought, wow, is that me? You have to jump. You must jump. I say this all the time, not just to you because of today's theme. You have to have the courage to jump, right? There's somebody who writes about courage on LinkedIn who I adore. I love his articles and stuff. Courage is so important. If you are a fearful person, you're not going to try stuff. You're not going to experience new things, whether that's new ice cream or a new relationship. It is so important. So if you are a fearful person, if you make decisions on a fear basis, which all of us do sometimes, you've got to really back up and think. I don't think that's entrepreneurial. I don't think that's the recipe for success. I will tell you, and this is a sexist thing to say, me included in this statement, women tend to be more careful in their business decisions. We don't go sign a lease for an office and then start a company. We start the company in our garage when our kids are at school and then put the kids to bed and go back to work in the garage. Men tend to be a bit more courageous in the way they start their businesses. They tend to borrow. I see in my founders, my men usually are willing to borrow. Women are really not into borrowing money. They don't want to owe anybody. Now, for me, that held me back a little bit. I watched my male colleagues and went, okay. So I would say, watch people who are courageous, align yourself with them, learn from them. Maybe in some case, like in my case, some of my more trepidatious friends were able to teach me something too.
Yes.
About being more careful.
Yes. Which is good. It's good to have a balance, but it's also good to surround yourself with people who are okay telling you go.
Listen, COVID was a great example of courage needed, right? So there's all these people looking at you going, what is happening? It was critically important for businesses to go, here's what's happening. You go home, I'm going to send you a computer screen. Don't worry, we're going to take care of this. You're going to be down for a while. And boy, Americans are so ingenious. I saw it because I ran COVID relief for my company. And boy, the way business leaders were like, okay. And the decisive ones, the ones that move fast, got ahead quickly.
Yes, they got ahead quickly. And because they got ahead quickly, they were able to actually even have some of the highest productivity, highest revenue growth.
You should have seen it. Oh,
and not just publicly traded companies, but a lot of small, like middle market, lower middle market companies.
The companies I worked with had 500 or less employees, and I worked with thousands of them on all the various COVID relief things. And I was on the phone. I had days where I was rolling 15 minutes at a time for 12 hours, right? Helping companies figure out what relief they could get. And those little companies, almost to a one, I can remember the ones that were really in big trouble because they stood out to me. Most of them were moving and grooving. We have a really vibrant way in our economy, and the way that Americans think about business is really impressive.
I agree. And especially as someone who's an immigrant in this country, for me, that's why I love being here. I love being a citizen now. Just because when you look at the American way of doing things, it's not the best, but we are very agile.
So funny. I don't even think of you as an immigrant because we are such sister friends from the minute I met you. I don't even think of you that way.
Well, that's the beauty of it, is that you can be here and you can assimilate, you can integrate, and like you said, as long as you are hardworking, as long as you have the courage to jump. I remember when we first met, I was like, wow, another woman in the room. and who are you, and tell me who you are. And and I think it's back home, I can't do that, right? Back home, the culture is very different. It's not the networking aspect is great. It's pretty much who you know. Whereas here, I can make who I know.
Right.
Right. So I think it's interesting that you sort of hit up the nail on the head. So let's get into closing round because we're kind of running out of time. I know you talked about the future. Imagine it's your last day on Earth many years from now, and you've accomplished everything you've ever dreamed of, especially when it comes to the legacy that you want to leave. But for whatever reason, you have to take everything you have ever created in this lifetime with you, and no one has access to any information about you anymore. But you get to leave behind 3 truths, 3 lessons that you want to leave with the world. What are your 3 truths, Jen?
This is a hard one. I think kindness. I try to think about what you give away comes back to you. I really have seen that to be true in my life. If you are kind, you are going to be on the receiving end. So if I could leave behind some little magical bubble that made the world be kind, I think that would be good for our world if we could remember that. Empathy is a big one. Too many times when we talk to each other, we're thinking about ourselves. Whereas if I need to get something out of you, if I could think about what you are feeling right now, I always tell myself, what is that person feeling right now? Because they'll remember the way I made them feel, not what I'm saying.
Yeah,
that is the truth of the world. If I could send that truth out, the way you make someone feel is more important than how you say it, what you say, right? And then my work hard, play hard. If I could have everybody wake up someday and for some reason work super hard and play super hard, I think it would be a pretty happy place.
Yes, I like that. What's your definition of a next-gen industrialist?
I am not necessarily that person, but when I see someone who I think is that, they are almost like a futurist, constantly thinking about what they make happen today and how it's going to impact the world in 5 years. I'm not exactly a fan of Elon Musk's behavior these days, but he is a next-gen industrialist.
Yes.
He saw ahead. Jeff Bezos saw ahead. Remember, he sold books.
Yeah, it's funny. I was looking at my Amazon account. I think I've been a customer of Amazon since it started.
I worked with a music company. The first year they sold more than books. They sold toys.
Yes,
and they did a jingle. They went from books to toys, and it was this really catchy jingle. Amazon.com's got tons of toys. To break through, we all thought they sold books. I mean, he was thinking ahead. Those kind of thinkers are not me. I'm not that. I was smaller. My product was new when I came out and said, this is the way outsourcing should be. Nobody was doing it my way. It wasn't that I was thinking like an industrialist. I was just irritated with the state of things and going to change them.
Well, that definitely is the definition of an industrialist. You might not be a manufacturer or in supply chain, but to me, it sounds like that's the reason why you have people like Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos, because they are scratching their own itch, right? And coming up with their own solutions to problems that others kind of got, it's not done this way.
Or they're just complacent and they accept things.
Well, exactly.
That attitude.
All of that. Well, Jen, this was definitely a beautiful conversation. I always enjoy talking about mergers and acquisitions with my guests, especially those who are alongside me and my team on transactions. So, folks, as we've heard today, the future of mergers and acquisitions, Jenn talks about the courage to jump. She also talked about the ability to plan ahead across not just the business, but financially and personally. We also talked about being kind and having empathy for each other. And that when you go into a transaction, at least what I got out of this is that everyone wins. It's a win-win-win situation. We also talked about working hard and playing hard. If you enjoyed this episode, please don't forget to subscribe, comment, rate, and share it with your network. This is Belinda Ephraim for NextGen Industrialists, as we continue exploring the ideas and leaderships revitalizing America's industrial base. Until then, keep pushing the boundaries of what is possible. Thank you so much, Jenn. I really enjoyed this.
All right. Bye.
Bye.